Hey everyone, it's Brad. Hope you're having a great day. Hey, I just want to take a few minutes of your time. I want to show you a technique that we've been using in Rethinking Data to help people become more efficient and effective at pulling together their story once they've done their analysis. I talk to a lot of different people through my workshops, through my coaching, and I hear the same problem come up a lot. And the problem is that people are like, Brad, we're doing the analysis, we're collecting all this data, we're drawing some conclusions, we've got some great recommendations, but then we're a little stuck because there's a lot of information and we're just overwhelmed by it all. And most of us at this point are thinking the same thing, right? We're thinking, how am I going to tell the story? Well, this is the trick. Stop asking that question. That question is actually slowing you down because it turns out you don't have to spend any time thinking about how to tell the story. Because in business, in the world of business, there's really only about 7 kinds of stories that we tell on a regular basis. Think about the conversations you've been in recently. Think about the presentations and discussions you've been in. I bet almost all of them fit into one of these 7 types of stories. And so there's a huge advantage there. Because instead of you thinking, how am I going to tell my story? You just have to figure out which one of these stories are you trying to tell. Because somebody somewhere who's an expert in each of these areas has already figured out how you tell that kind of story. And that is huge from an efficiency and an effectiveness standpoint. Because first of all, you and me are never going to come up with a better way to explain change management to your organization than a change management expert. They know how to tell that story. We're not going to be able to figure out how to tell status better than a project management expert. We're not going to be able to figure out how to give feedback better than a leadership and feedback expert. So people have already figured out how to tell these different kinds of stories. So that puts you really ahead of the game. Because once I know what I'm telling, once I have the structure, now you let the structure guide you through thinking about all of the data and all of the analysis that you have. Let me give you a quick example of how this looks. So I'm going to use the results and status story. That's the most popular story. It's the most common story we tell, letting people know how things are going. It's actually really simple. It's only 4 steps. So imagine in your status updates right now, how big they are. I've seen status updates that have like 35 slides in the deck because they're given all of the data about status. They're not actually telling the story of status. So let me show you how this is going to help me navigate that and come down to a really simple, clear story. So we might be starting and we're probably thinking, well, what do I want to talk about first this week in status? Should I give my KPIs? Should I talk about the recent customer experience survey we did? Maybe I should talk about this issue that just came up 2 days ago that's sort of bugging us all. I don't know where to start, so I'm already slowed down. Well, the structure fixes that. The structure's like, you know what? The first thing you have to do is you have to figure out overall what the headline is for status. Because when you're telling a status story, the most important thing your audience wants to know is where are we at? And not where are we at on every single metric individually. Where are we at overall as an organization or as a department or as a function or as a product? So now I know that's the first thing I have to do. I have to look at all my data and come up with a headline. The structure told me that's the first thing I need to do. So I'm going to look at my data and maybe come to the conclusion that, hey, we're in pretty good shape. This is good news. All right. Now what do I do? Well, the structure tells me, well, you just gave me a conclusion. You better support it. So now I have to explain why I think that's true, how I came to that conclusion. And not how from a process standpoint. I'm not going to go into all of the analyses I did. It's what are the things that are happening in the business that led me to believe that we're in good shape. Now, I didn't say what are all the metrics. I didn't say what's all the data. I said what are all the things that are happening in our business. Leaders, actually most people in business don't think in metrics. We think in terms of business concepts. A leader knows their business is doing well when their customers are happy. Now, whether you use a net promoter score to figure that out, or whether you use a J.D. Power survey metric to figure that out, or something else, is sort of irrelevant. Those are just inputs to coming to a conclusion. Are our customers happy right now? That's how your leaders are thinking. They want to know, are people happy? Is our business growing? Are our employees happy? Do we have good quality products? That's what they want to know. They don't necessarily need to know the KPI, at least not initially. So they want a simple argument. So why do I think we're in good shape? Well, here's why. we've reduced our costs, we're hitting our quality targets, we're delivering on time. So now I've got some evidence, all based on data. I could pull up metrics, but the metric isn't the story. The story is, these are the pieces of our business that are working well. All right. So I'm doing pretty good so far. Got the first part of my story. It's a pretty simple story, right? We're doing well for these 3 reasons. But we all know that our data never really line up 100% in one direction or the other. Sometimes, very rarely, they might. But usually, if overall we're doing fine, there's something that's not going so well. Or if overall we're in bad shape, there's usually a few bright spots. So the template helps remind you of that. The template says, okay, well, the next thing you need to be thinking about is the but statement. And the but statement is basically asking, is there anything you encountered that's opposite? You just told me everything's great. So in this case, is there anything that's not so great going on? So I could look back through my data and say, oh yeah, okay, there were some things that I need to bring to their attention. But now I know I'm going to bring them to their attention at the right time. I wasn't going to lead with them because they're not so big that I need to start with them and freak everyone out that thinking that everything's horrible. So the structure helped me figure out the right sequence to tell things in. Now, if these things were really big, if these were really big deals that were putting the company in jeopardy, then my what statement actually would have focused on, we're in really bad shape, we're in trouble. So the structure is helping me realize what's the right order to tell things in. So, okay, so now I've got to explain this my but statement. Well, it turns out not everything is great. We are having an employee engagement issue. And luckily, we've done an analysis. We even know why it's happening. So that's part of my story. So my story is that overall things are great, but not everything's great. We have this one issue, but we actually even know what's causing the issue. Now, if we were just looking at the data, and I see this happen all the time, where people just try to tell the story based on the set of reports they looked at, you forget that there's other parts of a story that aren't really data-driven, that aren't really based in the data. They're more based in the actions you're taking based on the data. And the structure reminds us of that. So the structure says there's one more thing we need to talk about in a status story. You got to tell me what you're doing next. That's the and part. And what's next? What's coming up? And in this particular case, I just told you we've got some problems. So I probably should tell you what we're doing to fix them, right? Because otherwise you're going to be really nervous because I told you something's wrong and I didn't tell you how we're fixing it. The point is, the structure helped me put together the story of the status of our business in this moment in time. This is the story. It's not 30 slides of charts and graphs. It's this simple explanation of here's where we're at right now. Now, once you've got the story, this is sort of what's cool about this. Once you've got the story, you are ready to tell that story in any context. If someone pulls you aside in the hallway and says, how are things going? You know how to tell the story. You're probably going to tell it really quickly. In fact, if someone pulls you aside in the hallway, this is probably all you're going to tell them because you only have about 60 seconds to give them an update. On the other hand, if your boss says, hey, I want you to come in, I'm meeting with my boss, I want you to give an update on your part of the business, well, you're probably going to take this simple storyline and say, all right, I might want to add a little detail to each one of these sections. So now you're going to be thinking about what's the right information to pull in. Should I pull in that graph? Maybe I don't need the whole graph. Maybe I just need to pull in the insights from the graph and put those on a slide. By starting with the story and letting the story dictate what data you need for support, you're going to have a much more simple and a much more streamlined presentation. So that's the technique. Super simple. Just change your question. Instead of asking, how am I going to tell the story? Simply ask yourself, what kind of story am I trying to tell? And then pick the one you're telling and find a structure that works to tell that story. If you do that, you are going to have a much more simple and much more clear story. Now, we talk about this. We teach this in our Rethinking Data workshop and in our Managing Your Story workshop. I'm actually going to also be in the next quarter, or maybe 2 quarters from now, I'm going to be putting together some 30 to 40-minute videos on each one of those story types and the structures, explaining how you think about each section of the structure. But you don't have to wait for me. That's the good news. I'm not the only one who has these structures. Go find an expert that you like in each of these areas and see how they say you should tell the story if you're raising issues or if you're explaining change or if you're setting goals. Use their structure. Like I said, even though the structures might look different on the surface, most structures for telling the same kind of story are ultimately going to be identical. The point is, don't waste your time thinking about the structure of the story, because you're not going to come up with something different. You're probably not going to come up with something as good. And it takes away from you being able to focus on the content, which is where your value really comes from. So that's it. That's the technique. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to leave some comments here on LinkedIn. If you want to jump out to my website, feel free to go out there, www.availadvisors.com. But I hope this technique helps you and makes you a better storyteller. So happy storytelling, everybody, and I'll see you next time around.